Good afternoon all. My name is Nick Lom, the Chair of the History of Australian Astronomy chapter of the Astronomy Society of Australia. For simplicity, the chapter is known by its initials as HARC. I would like to welcome you to the first HARC workshop for 2026. This webinar is jointly held with the Australasian Planetarium Society, APS. APS promotes the exchange of ideas, information and experiences within the planetarium community in Australia, New Zealand and the Australasian region. The Society has been operating since 1998 and represents all the major planetariums in Australia and New Zealand. Today we're celebrating the Melbourne Planetarium, which is Australia's oldest operating planetarium, having reached its 60th birthday at the end of 2025. The present planetarium at Scienceworks continues the legacy of its predecessor, the H.V. McKay Planetarium, that opened on the 2nd of December 1965. We also note that last year marked the 100th anniversary of the modern planetarium, with the first public planetarium session taking place at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, in Germany, on 7th of May 1925. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which I'm speaking. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I hope that you'll enjoy this afternoon's talks. Your questions and comments are welcome. Please put them in the chat and the speakers will answer them after their talk or at the end of the webinar. Our first speaker is Martin George, who will give us a brief history of planetariums. Martin has had a long career in planetariums, not the full centenary of the history of planetariums, but fairly long. He ran the Launceston Planetarium for many years, and now the relatively new Ulverston Planetarium at Hythe, Tasmania. Martin has been closely involved with not just the APS, but with the International Planetarium Society, IPS, and he served at one stage as its president. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Nick, and I'll begin by sharing my screen, and hopefully this will work fine. There we are. And hopefully that's working all right.
Yes.
And you can see my first slide there.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the Punalapana people of the lands from which I'm speaking here in northwestern Tasmania. They observed the sky and the land for many, many thousands of years, and I'm very pleased to be here today. Okay, I'll now get on to is this, I can't see whether this is working. This is very embarrassing. Right, can we see my next slide there?
Yes.
Which is, okay, I'll begin then. Thank you very much, Tony.
Yes, but we cannot see you. Again, we cannot see you, Martin.
Okay, that's probably an advantage, Nick. I'll just continue on and hopefully I can fix that. So I'd like to start with the Gotthof globe, which was a predecessor to the modern planetarium. It dates from the 17th century, and it was built at Gotthof Castle near Schleswig in northern Germany. It did suffer a fire. It went up to St. Petersburg in Russia, and there are there's at least one modern equivalent of the globe. The globe has, and had all along, a map of the Earth, a globe of the Earth on the outside of it, and people could get in to see the constellation patterns marked on the interior of the globe. Not a projection planetarium, of course, and neither was this. This is the McKay Planetarium in the Netherlands. It's also, as I mentioned, not a projection planetarium. It's actually an orrery with various astronomical displays. And this one dates from the late 1700s, and it was declared some years ago as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that's a wonderful place to visit if you haven't been there. But really, you could say that a major predecessor of the modern planetarium is the Atwood globe. And this was a globe with holes punched into it and illuminated from the outside. People went up inside it on a little trolley thing, and it was great fun. The globe rotated, and it actually simulated the apparent motion of the stars around us. And that's on display at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. But it was in 1923 that the Zeiss Model 1 was made. The Carl Zeiss Company, from the brainchild of Walter Bausfeld, built the Zeiss Model 1. Only 2 of them were ever made, and this was a true projection device that produced a quite realistic view of the starry night sky. This is the other one. This is the number 2. And this was on display at the International Planetarium Society conference in Berlin in 2024. I'm 100 years out there. And it also produced a very, very nice night sky. I should confess that I actually touched it at one point, and it was just a wonderful feeling to touch a Zeiss Model 1. Zeiss went on to make other models, but before they did that, the Model 1 was put on display in 1924 on the rooftop of the Scienceworks in Jena. And as Nick has mentioned, it finally became a public planetarium at the Deutsches Museum for opening on the 7th of May, 1925. Look at that crowd waiting to see the night sky. I wish I had crowds like that. Absolutely fantastic. The Model 2 came not long after that, of a completely different kind of design. And by 1930, there was a planetarium outside Europe, the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, which I've already mentioned. So that began the sort of far more international aspect of planetariums. The planetarium projector idea caught on with various different companies, not just Zeiss. We have Goto at the left there, Minolta in the middle. Many of you might have used Minolta cameras before. And in the United States, a relatively inexpensive kind of projector that many planetariums could afford, made by Armin Spitz. We've all been through this in the planetarium industry, at least if you've been here as long as I have. In order to show things up on the night sky, like planets and galaxies and so on, we had slide projectors, and it was a very fiddly bit of work preparing those slides and masking them and so on for use on the dome. But by the 1980s, we had the first digital projectors. This is actually the fisheye lens of the very first digital projector that was ever made by Evans and Sutherland. And the images weren't all that sharp, but it was a big step forward in having a digital night sky in which you could project lines and so on, and I think even the proper motion of the stars. The projection systems improved. You might remember those early 3-gun projectors. There's a much more modern single lens projector there at the lower right. And today, many planetariums around the world make use of data projectors spread around the room, aiming at different parts of the sky and blended together with software. So we've come a long way, really. And the ability to have digital projection means that we can have all sorts of programs up on the dome, pre-recorded shows, any images of any planet or galaxy we like. We can stick them up there at a moment's notice. But there are other types of projectors. The single lens projector that you see in the middle of the room here is a media globe that's in use in a high school in Merrillville in the United States. I saw this at a planetarium conference there some years ago. And there are also many, many portable planetariums that can be blown up, I don't mean exploded, but blown up into a spherical shape, and people can go in and watch a show. And kids absolutely love them. They love crawling in through the aperture there. At Narit in Thailand, they've developed a cardboard planetarium that can be easily assembled by schools, and they've distributed that around various schools in Thailand. And actually, given what it is, the night sky looks quite reasonable on the dome inside, and it's a great teaching tool. There are, of course, large planetariums that are featured in movies. I think this one's been in Contact or something like that. This, of course, is the Griffith Observatory and Planetarium in Los Angeles. Here's an unusual looking one at McKay. I photographed this in 2014. Yes, there is actually a dome inside that cone. And this is a relatively new installation, of course, only about a dozen or 13 years old. And going back to Narit, the National Astronomical Research Institute of Thailand has a planetarium dome completely enclosed within a building, and you can see the whole dome. This one opened in January 1920 and was opened by Her Royal Highness Princess Sirindorn, the sister of the current king, who's very, very keen on astronomy. Here's a map of our part of the world showing the numbers of planetariums that are around. We know of at least about 4,000 planetariums around the world. And as you can see, there's a huge concentration in Japan, China, and India, together with Thailand and Malaysia. And we have quite a number in Australia and New Zealand as well. And we're going to hear, of course, very soon about the very famous Melbourne Planetarium. The people come to a planetarium to learn, they come to be entertained, but they also are talked out of certain misconceptions. We get lots and lots of questions. As we all say in the planetarium industry, no question is silly. It's only silly if they don't ask it. But I can remember, for example, when Comet McNaught was around, people asked me, what was that great big meteor that I saw in the sky last night? So planetarium shows can help to educate people in a really fun way about what there is up there in the sky. One of the interesting things I found is that high school kids and primary school kids alike don't really understand longitude and latitude. And by projecting things like this up onto the planetarium dome, we can certainly explain that very well with the Earth rotating and lines of longitude and latitude marked on the globe. It's also wonderful to be able to introduce Indigenous astronomy in planetarium shows, and I'm very pleased that here in Ulverston we liaise with some local artists and Indigenous people to produce the Tequila Miletina Tea Show, which is called in English Heart in Country, and it's a very popular show about Tasmanian Indigenous practices and their observations of the night sky. But there's more. Even astronauts were trained in planetariums. You can see here a group of quite well-known astronauts being trained using a spherical celestial globe in a planetarium in Raleigh, Durham in the United States. And you may recognize the person on the second from the left. It's Neil Armstrong being trained to recognize star patterns. And they've done this in Russia too with planetarium projectors. Here you can see a picture I took in Star City some years ago, where you can see a Zeiss projector that's projecting or can project the stars up onto the dome above the simulated capsule. We can even have concerts in planetariums and have lovely images up there on the dome. The International Planetarium Society is the world body of planetarium professionals. We hold a conference every second year, the most recent one being in Berlin in Germany in 2024. I just mentioned to you a few moments ago that the other Zeiss Mark I, Zeiss Model 1 was put on display here, and it was a fascinating attraction at IPS 2024. The next one is IPS 2026 in Fukuoka, Japan, coming up in June this year. IPS produces a journal called Planetarian, and we also associate with quite a number of affiliate groups around the world. This is a picture from the Japan Planetarium Society conference in 2006, which had 250 Japanese planetarium professionals attending. And of course, we have our own Australasian Planetarium Society, as Nick mentioned a few moments ago. And we hold a conference every year. This was our most recent one, held at the Launceston Planetarium in early February this year. I'll finish with this brief introduction to planetariums with an interesting story. Years ago, I bought this book, the Living Webster Encyclopedic Dictionary, and I bought it because it said there were 1,001 helpful family hints in it. And I have a lot of trouble working out how to get stains off carpets and things like that. To my disappointment, the 1,001 helpful family hints were missing from the volume that I bought. So I decided to look up a few other things, and I decided to look up planetarium. And yes, it's there with the possible plurals of planetariums and planetaria, but the wording was rather frightening. It represents the motions and orbits of the planets and other heavenly bodies on a doomed ceiling. Yeah, so that purchase wasn't really a very, very good one, but at least it had planetarium mentioned in the contents. We estimate that over 140 million people visit planetariums around the world each year, but that was an estimate 6 years ago. I think we would probably find it's more than that now. So, as was said at a number of planetarium conferences, especially one I attended in Germany some years ago, we are there to inspire. If we can inspire people to look at the night sky, then we've done a great job. Planetariums really are for everyone. Now I'll let the others talk about our wonderful Melbourne Planetarium.
Thank you very much, Martin. Our second speaker is another Martin Bush, who will tell us about the early days of the Melbourne Planetarium. Martin is a senior lecturer in history and philosophy of science at the University of Melbourne. He's a cultural historian of science communication with expertise in the visual cultures of popular astronomy. And previously he was a curator at Museums Victoria. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks very much, and I will acknowledge that I am coming from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and a special acknowledgement to any Indigenous colleagues who may be with us today. Martin's spoken about the genesis of the modern projection planetarium and how quickly it got attention around the world, and Melbourne was absolutely no different. As early as 1928, John Moroney, then an assistant to Joseph Baldwin at the Melbourne Observatory and president of the Astronomical Society of Victoria, was writing letters to the Age newspaper calling for a planetarium to be established in Melbourne, as was the long-standing science writer Canopus in the Australasian in 1930. Other examples of early calls for a planetarium in Australia came from Friedrich Pedig, director of the Zeiss Company, who toured through Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne in 1931, promoting, amongst other things, the idea of a planetarium project in Australia. And another long-standing science writer for the Australasian, Charles Fenner, the Superintendent of Technical Education in South Australia, writing under the pen name Tellurian, wrote articles including in 1937, The Planetarium as an Australian Need. But sort of World War II was obviously a major disruption. Following World War II, the interest in planetariums continued, and we've seen how the individual interests of astronomers and popular astronomers, amateur astronomers, were focused on the planetarium. I would just briefly speak about the particular circumstances in Melbourne in the recovery from World War II that made it particularly amenable to these kinds of discussions, include things like the industrial base that existed in Melbourne, with a particular importance of science to industry that was demonstrated by the war effort, and as well how in little over a decade after World War II, the post-war migration had transformed Melbourne into a self-consciously cosmopolitan city, if one that was still considered to be rather socially conservative. Both these trends were to some extent displayed by Lawrence Hartnett, known as the father of the Holden, although he was removed from his post at General Motors Holden before the first Holden could be produced. Nonetheless, he was noted for his commitment to the Australian automotive manufacturing industry. This is not a Holden. This is a much rarer example of a Hartnett car, another attempt to get a locally manufactured car developed. But during the war, Hartnett was the director of ordnance production based in Melbourne, which included the production of optical devices. He has a story that he actually claimed wanted to take one of the small Zeiss projectors from Germany after the war as part of Australia's reparations claim and install it in Melbourne, but this call was overridden by the then CEO of CSIR, David Rivett. This is a nice story. Lawrence Hartnett was something of a self-promoter, and we need to sort of filter all of his stories through that kind of a lens. But he definitely did argue that the optical munitions branch of the ordnance production should be continued after the war to be able to continue a strategic industry within Australia, which he also claimed could produce an Australian-based planetarium. This was, sort of no significance. Of more importance to this direct story, Hartnett became a trustee of the Institute of Applied Sciences from 1945 to 1971, and was indeed a chairman of the Board of Trustees in that time. So after World War II, the interest was certainly rekindled in a planetarium in Melbourne. And one of the nicest stories was when 13-year-old George Wilson approached the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Frederick Connolly, offering to be a street astronomer on the top of the roof of the town hall for a small fee, but also suggesting that the town hall should install a planetarium in there at the same time. Sort of possibly more influential, the writer and public servant John Keating wrote an article on the Melbourne Observatory in 1943, before the end of the war, calling for a planetarium in Melbourne. There is more than one good reason, therefore, why Melbourne would do well to establish a planetarium here after the war. And there was significant support from the trustees of the Institute of Applied Science, as the Science Museum was at that stage known. As early as 1945, there had been a motion giving this support for establishing a planetarium within the Institute. But the full-size Zeiss projector was considered way too expensive. It was just far beyond the budgetary needs, budgetary availability of the Institute at the time. Nonetheless, through the 50s, sort of this interest continued. A committee of citizens was established in 1954. It was not certain, sort of who would be running the planetarium project, but in 1958, shortly after a renewed estimate of how much it would cost from the Zeiss company arrived, the National Museum of Victoria gave up any claims to be involved in the project, leaving it to the Institute for Applied Science. But you can see, sort of a list of people who had pledged support to the project, of course, without being able to provide the funds that would be needed for a full-size Zeiss planetarium. But then things changed when in October 1960, one of the trustees of the Institute and a former chair, Walter Bassett, seen on the very right here, had a meeting with Cecil McKay, son of Hugh Victor and chair of the Sunshine Foundation. And Cecil asked Walter, are there any particular projects that the Institute is looking at the moment? And Walter was able to say, well, actually, yes, for many years, we've been looking at the idea of getting a planetarium into Melbourne. And the Sunshine Foundation immediately signed up with a sizable donation. So, sort of that's a reminder to all administrators out there to always have some of your projects sitting on the shelf costed. So just in case you meet those benefactors that are able to come through. And you can see that this is a costing in $1967 of how much the Melbourne Planetarium project ultimately cost and where the funding came from. And you can see that certainly the initial and then subsequent donations from the Sunshine Foundation were by far the bulk of the costs that were met. So once this grant had been received, the decision from the trustees was to decide which kind of a projector to purchase, because the other thing that had happened in this period was that the medium-sized projectors had come onto the market, so that one was no longer required to commit to a full-size Zeiss projector at the expense that it came with. So Goto, for example, was a very recent entry into the planetarium market at this stage. Seizo Goto had founded his optical company in 1926, focusing on telescopes, but it wasn't until 1959 that there was the first display of the M1 projector at the Tokyo International Trade Fair. So this was very recent, and at the time, Martin George also talked about the fact that Amon Spitz had explicitly set up a planetarium company precisely for the point of making more affordable projectors than the Zeiss. But Zeiss had responded by that stage by introducing a range of a model of small projector as well. So there were three models that at least that were to be considered for. There was a very late entry by the Minolta company into this discussion. But in all the cases, Lawrence Hartnett in particular recommended going with the Goto on the basis that it was amongst the medium range things, it was the larger with the greater number of stars to be projected, and importantly, a greater range of special effects projectors available through Goto. But by this stage, by the time the decision was made in March, 27th of March 1961, when on Lawrence Hartnett's recommendation, the committee committed to buying a Goto planetarium with the Sunshine Foundation funds. By that stage, there were three Goto projectors installed around the world and another two under order. So the first one was in Bridgeport, Connecticut, but also in Illinois and Missouri at that stage. So it certainly was a decision that was not taken lightly. So the order for the planetarium projector was placed in 1961. The planetarium projector would finally arrive in Melbourne in June 1962. But we now step into the other aspects of establishing a planetarium. At this stage, it was considered that, maybe the planetarium would open in, within a year. But that was not to be the case. So the next problem that faced the Institute of Applied Science was finding the space within the building at that time, which was at that stage occupied by four institutional occupants: the Institute of Applied Science, the National Museum of Victoria, the State Library of Victoria, and the National Gallery of Victoria all had claims on that particular space, and so the space was managed collectively. And so when the Institute of Applied Science said, we need a room somewhere in this building that is at least 40-foot square and a 25-foot high ceiling, the other institutions were pretty much nah. And so that proposal was knocked back. So in early 1962, a new proposal for space was developed that they would construct a new 40-foot square building over a courtyard off the Queen's Hall. And this was agreed by the government that this could be done, and they would provide the architectural assistance to do this. But unfortunately, 3 sets of plans were gone through before a design was agreed. Tenders were called in October 1963, and construction was completed in 1964. So things have been pushed back. There was all the question of manufacturing the dome. The Institute had originally asked for a dome of 35 feet, as large as they thought they could do, but Goto worked in meters, and with a bit of back and forth, eventually the Institute agreed that a standard size of 10 meters could be done. They considered aluminium, perforated aluminium, which was common at the time, but was very expensive, particularly with the prices of aluminium in Melbourne at that stage. Goto went so far as to suggest an inflatable structure could be used. But eventually, the Institute agreed to go with a fiberglass design. The delay in the construction of the building meant that tenders had to be called again. And despite about 8 quotes that were received, the Institute went with the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation associated with Hartnett, as they were probably always going to do. And you can see the fiberglass dome being constructed in that building. And they had really run out of money by now, and so they were scrambling around to fit out the planetarium, and the seats were one of the last things. They were about to go for the cheapest seats that they could possibly find, when another conversation with the Sunshine Foundation resolved the problem. The Sunshine Foundation, not wanting to have their new planetarium all of a sudden have third-rate seats, said that they would stump up a little bit more money to fit the planetarium out properly. They did so, and although the reclining seats that they were sold on were not actually installed in the planetarium, mainly due to safety concerns, there was a slight amount of miffiness from the foundation when saying, you asked us for extra money for these fancy seats and you got different seats, but that was resolved. So there were certainly a number of problems in the establishment of the Melbourne Planetarium. One of the things was that many of the components that were arrived in 1962 were found to be discolored or even cracked. A lot of them were, these issues were mostly resolved when the engineer from Goto Shimbori finally arrived in March and April 1965 to complete the installation of the planetarium projector, and sort of extra parts were produced. I do think that the planetarium professionals in the audience would appreciate John Kendall's report from just a few years later, saying how wise it was that the Melbourne Planetarium ordered extra equipment, because planetariums often find that extra funds are not available afterwards, and that there's a depreciation fund, because it turns out the planetarium equipment is being modernized all the time. Sort of finally, after openings that were planned for 1961 and 1962, and April 1965 and August 1865 and October 1865, finally on the 2nd December 1865, the HV McKay Melbourne Planetarium was opened. And I would just note that both the director of the Institute and the chair of Board of Trustees had changed by this time. I'd like to claim it was the Planetarium Project. That's probably going a bit too much, but I do think that the Planetarium Project probably took up a lot more of Charles Focken's time in his last year as director than he had probably planned. But of course, the Melbourne Planetarium wasn't the first planetarium in Australia. There was the planetarium that was operating at the Museum of Applied Arts in Sydney between about 1950 and until around about 1980. And by the time the opening of Melbourne, the projector that would go on to be the basis of the Queen Victoria Museum Planetarium was already in operation at the Hobart Department of Adult Education. But the Powerhouse Planetarium closed down, and no one in Launceston would ever trace continuity to something that happened in Hobart. So the Melbourne Planetarium can certainly claim to be the oldest continuously operating, more or less continuously operating planetarium. Okay, so I've run out of time already. There were 52,000 visitors in the first full year, and an average of about 50,000 visitors per year were maintained for the first decade or so. That's about, in context, was about 2% of the population of Melbourne. At the time, about two-thirds of the visitors were education audiences with sort of a range of shows, but there are also special visits from usual suspects like the Astronomical Society and scouting groups. But I'm very pleased to see the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Melbourne sort of was an early contender, as was the RAF with their navigation courses in the planetarium. By the 1980s, the planetarium show market internationally was mature, and Melbourne increasingly participated in this, including hits like Planets of Doom, based on the non-dangers of planetary alignments. I have no time to talk about the detail of the second half of the H.V. McKay Melbourne Planetarium, but there are experts in the room that know far more than I do about this anyway, so I'd like to take that up in question time. There are, sort of a range of the early lecturers that, sort of need to be acknowledged, but all of us in the planetarium world know how many people it takes to run a planetarium, including the technicians, the artists and designers, the customer service officers who sell the tickets, and this is a view of the ticket booth who sell the tickets and provide the information about the planetarium. In the first place, it is worth saying that after a fairly shoestring operation over its first life, in the second half of its life under Robin Hurst in particular, the staff and the capacities of the Melbourne Planetarium certainly grew, and peak attendance for the Melbourne Planetarium was at about 108,000 in 1985, 1986, coinciding with the return of Halley's Comet. In that time period, I believe that Melbourne hit a Halley Valley like many other planetariums after this, but nonetheless, sort of attendance remains strong, sort of getting back up to 100,000. And by the time of its closure, it's estimated that the Melbourne Planetarium had, H.V. McKay Melbourne Planetarium had done over 30,000 sessions with more than 2 million visitors. And with the closure of the museum at Swanston Street address, the final session of the H.V. McKay Planetarium was on 13th of July 1997. I'm pleased to say that that was the week after I had arrived in Melbourne, and I went to the penultimate session of the H.V. McKay Planetarium. And got a copy of the poster that you see on the right. But while, sort of most of the museum displays that were cleared out of Swanston Street moved up to the new Melbourne Museum, of course, the Melbourne Planetarium moved across to Scienceworks to enter its new age, which we are about to hear of. Apologies for going over time there.
That's fine, Martin. Thank you very much. I'm sure you triggered a lot of memories for some of the people in the audience. Our last speaker, last but not least, is Tanya Hill, and she'll be telling us about the Scienceworks years for the Melbourne Planetarium. Tanya joined the Museums Victoria in 1999 and was part of the team that opened the Melbourne Planetarium at Scienceworks. Previously, she had carried out research in the field of extragalactic astronomy, where she hunted supermassive black holes using a variety of Australian telescopes. And importantly, at least in my opinion, as a postgraduate student, she was a guide at Sydney Observatory. Tanya.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Yes, that was being a guide at Sydney Observatory, and learning about planetariums from there was certainly something very important to me as well. And as I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Bunurong people as the traditional owners of the land here at Scienceworks, and pay my respects to all First Nations peoples, and also to their continuing relationship with the land, sea and sky. So thank you to both wonderful Martins for setting this up so well. I also got to visit the HV McKay Planetarium as I was finishing high school. Actually, I had a visit to Melbourne in the 1990s, and it was the first planetarium that I ever visited. So it was quite amazing to then think a few years later, I was setting off in this career in this field. So where are we? And so, as Martin mentioned, the planetarium closed down from the centre of the city in Melbourne in 1997 and reopened here at Scienceworks in August of 1999. I actually began here in January of that year, back when the planetarium was just a shell. And it was quite an amazing few months to get everything up and running and ready. And you can see there when we did first open, we had the Goto star projector there highlighted in our planetarium foyer. It was a lot of nostalgia for people to be able to see such a beautiful piece of machinery and then go into the new planetarium and experiencing that as well. So here we were billeted as the first digital star projector in the Southern Hemisphere. And, I've come down from Sydney to Melbourne to start. And one of the first things that I was confronted with were 48 slide projectors, as Martin has already alluded to. And I just wanted to, again, paint, because I was thinking about this as I put it together, paint a picture of what it was like to get an image into the planetarium using those slide projectors. So we would create the image, it would be burnt onto a CD, we would courier it across town to the film lab, wait at least 24 hours for the courier to then send us back our strip of film. And then it really was like a production assembly. Martin Bush was part of this as well, in that we would have to cut all the film up, put it all into those little slide holders, and then wait for shows to finish, grab a carousel, pop everything in their right place, and see, had we created what we wanted to be displayed on the dome itself. It was quite a process to go through, and there were a lot of them. So to get a single image across the dome, what we call an all sky, that would take 6 slide projectors working in tandem. And then so you could do a lovely crossfade from one all sky image to another. We then had a pair of projectors. So you could close the iris on one, open the iris on the other, and then you would hear that musical sound of all the click, 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 clacking as the projector that wasn't in use would set up ready for when it was needed. So we had 6 times 2 for the all skies to create a panorama was 12 slide projectors. Then you need to double that. We had 5 single projectors across the dome, which again, double that was another 10. And then our 2 zoom projectors. And these are amazing because they had their big zoom lens and a motorized mirror. And that was the trickery that we used to be able to make it feel like we were approaching a planet or moving past a planet. So that was one aspect of the planetarium. Then we had video projection. But of course, unlike today, when we can cover the dome in video, we had 3 different video projectors. One was at the back and covered about 60% of the front of the dome. And so we could often fool audiences that we were showing video across almost their entire field of vision. The other 2 slew projectors, and I still remember this, so they were a much smaller region of the dome that could cover it in video, but you would be able to move them around. So imagine what it was like, because especially for our seasons show spinning out, we wanted to show the path of the sun as it traveled across the sky from east to west. So the only way to do this was to put the sun, an image of a video of the sun in one projector, slew it across the dome, try and make sure the two projectors would meet, and then continue the sun's journey. And we were always trying to make this better because the projectors would fall out of alignment, their color balances would change. So you would go from a sun that was a bit greener or a bit redder. But we did it, and audiences still, as Martin George said earlier, hopefully we were still able to inspire our audiences and get them to look up and enjoy the night sky and astronomy. The other thing, there were also special effects projectors to show bolides and aurora, add weather events like lightning, snow, and clouds for a bit of atmosphere. But really the prize, what made us the first digital star projector was the DigiStar 2. And I found this exhibition in a science museum in Japan, where they've actually taken their old DigiStar 2, it's amazing to see it there, and pulled it apart. So you can see the cathode ray tube, which would direct the beam. And pretty much what was going on was that it was just a list of coordinates that the beam would be directed to, and it could only create either dots, our stars in the sky, or if you left the beam on while it traveled from one spot to a next, you could create a line. So really we were limited with just stars or wireframe models. But the advancement was that those stars, all 9,000 of them, out to about a distance of 650 light years, that we weren't just tied to their 2D positions of the sky. We now had that third dimension of distance. And so for the first time, planetariums, we could view the stars from other locations other than always being stuck on Earth. We could fly through the stars, an amazing effect that our audiences still love even today. And we could also show proper motion, the position of the stars going back into the past and also off into the future. The downside to this was that our stars were green due to the green phosphorus coating on the screen for the electron beam, and they were quite blobby. So even at this point, in some ways you would say that the Gotto or the original star projectors were a much more pristine view of the night sky, but the trade-off with the DigiStar was that we could do a few things more. And the DigiStar actually harkens back to, it was built by the company Evans and Sutherland. And I didn't want to put the clip here in the presentation, but I would invite people to go back and have a look at the opening scene to Star Trek 2, the Wrath of Khan, because that was the first ever accurate fly through of a star field. And you can see it there in the opening credits, done by Evans and Sutherland back in 1982. And that was the precursor to now to our DigiStar that we had back in 1999, and we're still continuing with the DigiStar projector today. It's amazing to think that that was the first time. It was a 3.5-minute clip, and it took them a few days to about a week or so to do it, but in all it was about 4 hours of rendering time to get that filmed. So as Martin Bush used to always say when he was here at the planetarium, we had 3 different methods of projecting things on the dome, but each one only did two of the 3 things we wanted. So with our slide projectors, our all sky, we could fill the dome with color, but we couldn't get any movement. Our DigiStar, the star projector, we could add movement and it would be across the entire dome, but we lacked color. Everything with this greeny glow to it. And then our third piece was the video, where we had movement and color, but we could only play with that in certain sections of the dome. It was a challenge. It was, in some ways, it was a really fun, creative challenge to be able to produce shows in this environment. But then by 2005, we were able to enter what we call the full dome era. So the development of high resolution projectors that could cover a wide area and that had enough brightness for the throw across the dome, they could now be used. You also had the development of the blending, the technology to be able to blend the different projectors together to create one seamless image. And so we got our first full dome projector in 2005, which were the 6 Barco CRT projectors. And really, we used those for as long as we possibly could. It was really like light pollution was filling our skies at the end. We were getting less and less light, less and less color. And then in 2013, we upgraded to the new lot of projectors. I've forgotten the person's name, but as Martin Bush alluded to in his talk, that yes, nothing stayed still very long. And I love this image because this was where Warwick and I realised that, or my colleague Warwick Lawrence, who is currently also working at the planetarium, we realised we'd been bumped because we made our own shows here. We were able to try and we really pushed the colour and the brightness as our projectors were dying. And when we saw it for the first time, this is peeking back from the cove of the planetarium and saw our show tilt. And it was kind of like, I imagine what that moment in The Wizard of Oz must have been like when they first went from black and white to colour. It almost hurt our eyes that we realised just how much colour and vividness and things were in our show that had been missing as we'd really had pushed those previous projectors as far as they would. And then our most recent upgrade was back in 2019. And I'm pleased to say that at the moment we are in the early stages of hopefully preparing for our next upgrade in the next year or so. And so with full dome production, we can now, rather than trying to get those 3 separate elements to all work together and create a single image, we now have full dome video across our entire screen. And this was just a clip to show you how full dome works. So we create our shows in a circular format. The bottom of the screen is what the audience sees at the front of the dome. The top of the screen is actually what's sitting behind them. And this is from our show Capturing the Cosmos, which we were able to put together in collaboration with Castro, the ARC Centre for All Sky Astrophysics. And the other great thing about working now in this full dome environment meant that the legacy that we had actually continued from the HV McKay days, back when Robin Hurst was creating shows for the planetarium, well, we continued on creating new shows. And now that all planetariums around the world had this same format, we could distribute our shows to other venues. And so in the last count, we have made 180 show licenses, and our shows are now screening in 25 countries, which is always quite thrilling to think that our little production house here in Melbourne has been able to spread the astronomy that we're doing right across the world. I was thinking about it when I saw all these posters for our full dome productions. It's trying to kind of choose which one's the favorite. It's like trying to choose between different children. But I did want to just make a shout out to Stories in the Stars, which was the show where we looked at the night sky of the Burong people from Northwest Victoria. And we put that show together in collaboration with the Northwest Nations clans. And so that was certainly a highlight, being able to introduce often for the first time, our public to the wonderful knowledge and stories of the Burong people. And as well as the 3 posters there that I have on the right, they're now, because just in recent times at the moment, we've concentrated more on using the capabilities of our Digistar software. Because I often like to say that now with the planetarium, we really have the entire universe at our fingertips, in our computers. And we are now able, with our incredible presenters, to present live shows. And so these are One Ticket to the Universe, is where we travel off Earth out through the solar system, through the galaxy, until we're left floating amongst the entire universe. Whereas the other 2 shows, The Planets and Where's the Water, is concentrated on looking at the planets and staying within our solar system. But it is really lovely to be able to see the connection that the live shows can give to our audiences, and being able to share the knowledge of our presenters. And lastly, just a shout out to all the incredible creative people that I've been able to work with across the years in terms of making these show productions. Again, we're running out of time, so just really quickly, as well as making planetarium shows, we've done some other wonderful things. We've set up a full dome festival here in Melbourne, the Dome Under Festival, which Warwick Lawrence has headed up. Back in 2006, we invited all the International Planetarium Society to have the first conference in the Southern Hemisphere, which is very exciting. We've done music under the dome. We've also had plays and live performances as well. So the planetarium can really branch out and be quite an amazing venue. But as I was putting this up, I was thinking, what's one of the legacies that we have done here at the Melbourne Planetarium? And I think this is the one that I'm most proud of, because back in 2002, as the world was kind of moving to full dome projections in the planetarium, the American Museum of Natural History put together an amazing database called Digital Universe, where it included, particularly through the Milky Way galaxy, you'd be able to show up the location of exoplanets and globular clusters, star clusters, a whole range of objects, and show where they were pulsars, supernovae. And then you could fly out of the Milky Way and show the other galaxies that are around. Now, in 2002, that was just the start of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey from the Northern Hemisphere. And here in Australia at the Anglo-Australian Observatory, they had just finished off the 2DF field. And so it was amazing, as you know, coming from an extragalactic background in astronomy, to be able to share those data sets and give people that impression of that we are just one galaxy against so many other galaxies in the universe. But I knew that more surveys were coming on board, especially here in Australia. We had 6DF, we had Wiggles, we had Gamma by 2013, and none of these data sets were available to be able to show to the public. And so around 2013, the planetarium was working with the Skyscan system then. And so working with Skyscan, working with fantastic astronomers here in Australia who were doing some of these surveys, we were able to input all of those new galaxies that had been discovered from 2002 to 2013 into the dome. And I happened to give a presentation at the International Planetarium Society conference in Beijing. And being able to add, this is just a list of how much more we knew about the universe as a whole at that time, it was quite amazing, the reception. In fact, I remember I got interviewed for the local news that night for Beijing. And best of all, I think it gave the planetarium community the nudge that it was needed, so that a group was set up called Data to Dome about how moving forward we could always, because just like planetariums, astronomy doesn't stay still either. There's always new things to be added in. And I'm very pleased to say that now, or any database, any new database, we can get it directly into our domes. And in fact, if you've got an image, I'm showing here a screen capture from the planetarium. Remember what I said earlier about how long it took to do slides? To create this image, I pulled out an image of Centaurus A from the European Southern Observatory, which already has its metadata embedded in the image. I literally dragged and dropped that into the planetarium software and then created a little zoom there so you can see. And as we fly, what started with back in 1999, just 9,000 stars, now we can fly through the billions of stars that are part of the Gaia catalogue and database as we zoom in and really give our audiences the best view possible, the best experience of actually what it could be like to go out and explore the universe. So I wanted to finish up by saying happy birthday to the Melbourne Planetarium. It's been an honour to be part of its legacy, and thank you all for joining us today to hear about some of the story, and also a shout out to all the planetariums across the country that do such an amazing job at getting astronomy out to the people. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Let me ask you a question. It's amazing to hear about the technological developments over the years in planetariums, and I've seen quite a lot from both the original McKay Planetarium and out at Scienceworks. But over the years, planetarium professionals always told me that star images are not sharp enough, and they really regretted not using the original optical projectors. So how far have we got? Are the star images as clear and as sharp now as they were with the original projection planetaria?
Yeah, no, great question. I would say, and I mean, you have to remember too that my first experience working in a planetarium was with the Digistar 2 and the blobby stars. So certainly we have moved on quite amazingly from that. I would say now that certainly the star field in our planetarium is incredible, and yeah, the resolution. I mean, it's an 8K projection that we're seeing. It really is. Amazing. And just another thing that another little story to let you know about, back in the early days when they were first doing the blending to get the different projectors to work together, and it was constant that we were always having to be on top of that to make sure that we'll try and minimize the seams as much as possible, to the extent that I remember one of our technicians going on a camping trip with his family and looking up at the night sky, and his first thought was, oh, the blending actually is really good tonight. Before he realized where he was. But now it's also very stable. Like I can go into the planetarium all the time, and you don't see the seams, you don't see the blendings, and the star quality, the colors that you can see, that capability of being able to journey off the Earth and actually take people through the planets of the solar system or out to the galaxy, which I love. I think it's really advantage and definitely worth it.
All right, thank you, Tanya. I can't really see any questions.
Claire, did you have something? Sorry, you got a hand up.
I did actually, Tanya. I was just wondering about, it looks like the resolution has improved dramatically, but I'm just wondering about contrast. Using, the full dome video, what sort of contrast are you actually able to get? Can you get blacks?
Yes, so it's not possible to get black, but we can get pretty close in that. Yeah, you don't. It's much different to our CRT era where everything kind of had that grayness to it. Yeah, you certainly, and as your eyes adjust as well, you're fine. And particularly too, I want to talk about like our production team as well, that do so much work for our full dome productions, making sure that that they're grading things as well. So try and minimize all of that light scatter that you get across the dome.
Can I ask a question, Tanya? It's
Yes.
Peter Williamson here.
Hi, Peter. Long time.
I know. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. You know that our planetarium was burnt to the ground, don't you? Yes.
I know. Yeah, very sorry.
Here's the question. I've just been reading up from a thing from Czechoslovakia where they're actually making the whole dome screen out of millions and millions of pixels. Mm-hmm. Is this going to be the latest thing that we're going to have to think about and find the money for it?
Absolutely. That's the things we dream of. I think it's okay to say that, if we were to if that pot of gold ever came and we were able to do a big redevelopment here, then I would certainly love to see an LED dome here in Melbourne. But yes, I think it is the way of the future, and I mean that is where you're going to get your blacks, and your amazing vivid color as well. But certainly for what we're able to do these days, the technology is still fantastic.
Yeah, I'm back in the old days. I still love the old Zeiss projectors with the incredible sharp images, But anyway, we've all got to move forward, haven't we?
That's right. And come and visit us in Melbourne. We can show you how sharp the stars look these days.
I will. I will do that next time. Great. Okay, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Would anybody else like to ask a question or make a comment? Robin, would you like to make a comment Robin Hurst.
Yeah, look, it's been fascinating, Nick, to hear of that history in concentrated. My comment would be, I think our memories of those sharp images of the optical projectors are probably got sharper as we've got older, and but I think a sharp image will keep the audience engaged for a few seconds these days, and it is really the story that you can tell and the way you can transport people, and use the planetarium as this element that can travel through space and time, that really is where the future is, and that's what Tanya and Martin and others have done superbly well, and to have an export industry now is it's great. It's really fantastic. So I'm happy to answer any questions from my memory, but we all look back and we were all better then 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But things are really moving well. I think we just need to get more political support would help, and so yeah. But if we can dream it, like the new domes that are around, then we can make it happen.
Good. Thanks, Robin. I should say that the first time I heard about you was there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald in the computer section saying that you have automated the slide projectors in the dome with Apple II computers. Is that something you remember?
Yeah. Well, in 1984, I'd inherited the old Goto projection system, but that there was the odd slide projector associated with it. So I sort of came up with this idea of multi-slide projectors hanging underneath the dome, and it was an electrosonic system, and it was driven by an Apple II computer. And I went to the board, and it was needed like $50,000 at the time, which was it was a lot of money, but they backed it and put the money up, and sure, it was revolutionary for its day, because it was probably the largest audio visual installation in the country, and it worked for a long time. It did have some downsides, but it did allow you to tell really good, stronger stories.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Robin.
So I could just add a couple of comments there based on what's been said so far this afternoon, and including what Robin's been talking about, and that is that we really are here to inspire. And one of the important things about planetariums is that no matter what equipment we've got, we need the people to inspire the audiences, and that's a major part of what we do. We have some wonderful presenters all over Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world too, of course. And I'll share with you one of my favourite memories from working in a planetarium, and that is when a little girl said to her daddy, as they were leaving the planetarium after being inspired on all about the night sky, turned to her dad and said, "Daddy, can we get the binoculars out tonight?" And just that one sentence, that one question, made me feel we're doing good things.
All right, good, Martin. Yeah. But Martin Bush, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make?
Not really, except to just say that it is great to see so many of the people that have contributed to the Melbourne Planetarium over many years here, and sort of some of you I haven't seen for a little while, and it's it's great to see you here.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, I think it's time to wrap up. We've gone a little bit over time. I would like to thank the two Martins and Tanya for their talks. I think they're all fascinating and informative. There are also technical people behind the scenes, Brendan Dew and Dirk Goes, and of course Donna, who's done a lot of work in organising this workshop. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the talks as enjoyable as I did. And if you're an ASA member or eligible to be an ASA member and you're not a member of HARC, please consider joining. If you have any feedbacks on the workshop, please send to toner.stevenson@sydney.edu.au. And I hope to see you all at our next event. Thank you.